This
Okay,
conference will
I
now
will
be
look at
recorded.
your surgical topics one by one. Ah, so we'll start with tympanoplasty today, and then slowly, once one after the other, we will cover. And once your course is over, then we will take up the important chapters one by one. So, tympanoplasty is a surgical procedure performed to eradicate infection and restore the function of middle ear. So the basic difference between myringoplasty and tympanoplasty is myringoplasty only is performed to close the perforation. But here the middle ear disease or middle ear pathology is not addressed in myringoplasty. Whereas in tympanoplasty, you try to address the middle ear pathology. Now, before subjecting any patient to surgery, these are the few investigations which are routinely done in our OPD. This you can need not go through. And imaging studies, mostly we rely on X-ray of the mastoids and X-ray, and in some cases, if it is a suspected case of cholesteatoma, then we go for a CT scan or a clear-cut case of cholesteatoma, or some patient presenting to us with some intra or extracranial complications. In those few selected few, we go for a CT, but that is high resolution CT scan. But routinely, it is only X-ray. So why X-ray is required? An X-ray we do of both the mastoids, even though one mastoid is diseased, that is to compare the diseased mastoid with the normal one. So X-ray, there are different views. Mostly the Law's view or the Schuller's view is taken, and there are other views like town views, Stenver view. We will and those we will be taking up in radiology or instrument class in detail. So as of now, Schuller's view or Law's view are two things you remember. Now, X-ray is taken for a few reasons. One is to see the disease extension. Whether now a patient has come to you, the discharge from the ear. So whether the disease is involving the middle ear or it has also involved the mastoid. So presence of disease in mastoid can be detected in X-ray, where you see that the mastoid air cells in a normal mastoid, when normal, well nematized mastoid, will give you a honeycomb appearance. And if you see, the air cells will appear dark or black in color. But in case of mastoiditis or presence of pus in the mastoid antrum, you will find that there is uh, haziness, not a clouding of the mastoid air cells. So clouding is the correct terminology. So clouding of the mastoid air cells, and if it is a case of if it is a case of cholesteatoma, and you want to see the amount of bone erosion, and whether the tegment plate is intact or not, the dural plate is intact or not. Okay, so these all, and the size of the mastoid antrum, whether it is a normal antrum or it's a contracted mastoid antrum. So all these things and different things also should be taken into account. So possible intracranial involvement. One is the clinical suspicion. Obviously, we have discussed everything, how the patients will present to you if there is an intracranial complication. So, more, but nothing can take the place of a good clinical examination. So, if you have done a thorough clinical examination, this investigation is just to confirm it. Already you are 90% sure, just 10%, and also to document it, suppose for future also. Then degree of mastoid nematization. So based on that, we have three radiologically three types of mastoid. a sclerotic mastoid, a diploic mastoid, and a pneumatic mastoid. So a sclerotic mastoid is normally seen in 20 to 30% of population, and then the next being the most common being the pneumatic, followed by sclerotic and then diploic. So pneumatic mastoid indicates that there is air present inside the mastoid air cells, and all of you, in case of acute inflammation, you find that there is air fluid level in the mastoid antrum. Sometimes you may get an air fluid level, but in case of chronic disease process involving the mastoid, it usually lands up with sclerosis of the mastoid. Then type of surgical approach to be used. Here we use mostly the post-oral approach, but some centers, the center use the endomeatal or the end-oral approach also. Presence of labyrinthine fistula, this is also can be diagnosed clinically. Fallopian canal anatomy as well as tegmental defect. Well, fallopian canal anomaly is very difficult to see in a what you say in X-ray, but CT will give you the clue. Tegment defects, to some extent, you can make it out in the X-ray, but here CT scan will give you a very vivid dimension of the tegmental defect. But fallopian canal anatomy, if you see patient is having a facial nerve palsy, then obviously you want to do a HRCT of the temporal bone with special emphasis on fallopian canal. Otherwise, routinely we don't ask for any, only to see for fallopian canal. So prerequisites for myringoplasty, it is asked to a lot of students in the practical examination, and it's sad to say most of you are not able to give a correct answer. So the one is the central perforation, which has been dry for at least 6 weeks. So, and then presence of normal medullary mucosa, intact ossicular chain, and good cochlear reserve. So these are the four requisites of for myringoplasty. So when these four are present, then you can plan the patient for a myringoplasty. Now, intact ossicular chain is difficult to see if the perforation is small, but you can do a simple test known as the patch test. So here what you do a audiogram first, and then you patch the small perforation and repeat the audiogram again. So if there is a closure of airborne gap of around 10 decibel, then you take into consideration that the ossicular chain is intact. And if the airborne gap doesn't close, even though you patch the tympanic membrane and remains as such, then definitely the ossicular chain is involved and there is some erosion. And other investigation is you just do a pure tone audiometry. If the loss is exceeds 45 to 50 decibel, then you suspect a ossicular chain involvement. So already I have told you the incudostapedial joint being the most vulnerable area. Indications for tympanoplasty is conductive hearing loss secondary to perforation or ossicular dysfunction, and chronic or recurrent otitis media, chronic medullary pathology causing progressive hearing loss, and perforation for more than 3 months. So this 3 months period means most likely it won't heal by itself. So that is how. So in those conditions, in this situation, you have to do a surgical intervention. Now, Contraindications are malignant neoplasm of outer or middle ear, in which eradication of tumor must take precedence. Invasive life-threatening Pseudomonas infection of outer or middle ear in diabetics, that is malignant otitis externa. Intracranial complication of ear disease, where you stabilize the patient first and try to, and then once the patient is stabilized, and then immediately you can go for the ear surgery. Relative contraindication is acute exacerbation of chronic otitis media. Although there are few surgeons who say if you do it in the acute phase, there is vascularity is more and the healing rate is better. Then there are other school of thought saying that in acute phase there will be pus in the middle ear and there will be lot of toxic metabolites, and the bleeding will be very irritating, and if it is a brisk bleeding, then while placing the graft there will be trouble. Particularly the surgeon has started his or her career, then it will be difficult to manage to keep the graft. Chronic mucoid discharge associated with allergic rhinosinusitis. So usually we have seen allergic rhinosinusitis. If this clear-cut case of allergy, then what happens? Ki you have to control the allergy first. Otherwise, there is a graft failure. So we have done here 2 or 3 cases which have failed, and one lady both the ears failed because her allergy could not be controlled. So very important. Chronic otitis externa caused by Pseudomonas, Aspergillus, Staph aureus. So this means any otitis externa, acute or chronic, you should avoid middle ear surgery. So first you treat the condition and control the otitis externa, and then you plan. Even Aspergillus niger means even otomycosis also is a contraindication. If you find otomycosis, invariably most of the cases we have seen there will be a perforation. But once you control the otomycosis, then only you plan for surgery. Not then otherwise there will be high chance of failure. Non-functioning eustachian tube, well, uh, in this condition particularly, what happens ki when you graft it also, the negative pressure uh, pulls the graft medially, and then what happens ki there is a remnant perforation also. So in non-functioning eustachian tube, you try to find out what is the cause, whether it's an obstruction like adenoids, and in that condition you do adenoidectomy or adenotonsillectomy and then plan for surgery, or whether it is due to a nasal pathology like sinusitis which you have not detected, and then this sinusitis leading to post-nasal drip and eustachian tube dysfunction, or even in case of allergy also, allergic nasopharyngitis will lead to tubal dysfunction. So how to test for eustachian tube function is there are few things. Just you can keep few drops, ear drops in the ear, and then after 10 to 15 minutes the patient will appreciate the bitter taste of the drop in the mouth. If that is not there, you can also take the help of impedance audiometer, and you increase the pressure in the middle ear and keep a probe in the nasopharynx, and you, if the pressure, increased pressure does not go into the nasopharynx and the nasopharynx pressure remains low, then definitely there is some eustachian tube obstruction. So these are few, 1 or 2 tests. Simple test is you can ask the patient to do Valsalva maneuver, and Valsalva means the air is forced into the Eustachian tube. But you remember, in case of acute inflammation of the nose, nasopharynx, don't advise the patient to do Valsalva. So what happens ki all the organisms are pushed or flushed from the nasopharynx into the middle ear. Only or significantly better hearing ear to avoid risk of irreversible. So always surgery carries some amount of risk actually. So you have to calculate the risk and benefit ratio. And if it is the only hearing ear, well, some surgeons who are expert, they go ahead and do it. But for a beginner, I think it's better to avoid because of risk of sensory neural hearing. The sensory neural hearing loss actually with beginners, what happens ki their hands are not tuned to the fine movement, and they try to, when they are trying to palpate the ossicle, they press it too hard, and these are transmitted if the ossicular chain is intact, are transmitted into the inner ear. So it is just like a mere pressing of the malleus to elicit a round window reflex is equal to exposing the person to a 120 decibel noise. So you just gauge the amount of risk it is. Chronic cough in smokers or COPD. So patient with COPD and those who are smokers, know it's always advisable to control the pulmonary segment first. Otherwise, with coughing and all, there is every possibility the graft might get rejected. So these I have told you: the transcanal approach, the post-auricular, the endoral. So here mostly we do the post-auricular approach. Few cases we have done transcanal, particularly if the perforation is a small one and limited to posterior, inferior quadrant or posterior quadrant. So, and if the external auditory canal is adequate in dimensions. So what happens if the canal is narrow? No, then it is better to avoid this. Then otherwise, what happens? You land up struggling in the narrow canal, and then the chance of injury to like the flap, to the tympanic membrane, or to the chorda tympani nerve can occur. Post-auricular approach, almost major part of ear surgery is done by the post-auricular approach. So the endoral approach, here it has two incision. So here the transcanal approach, the incision is named as a Rosen's incision. Post-auricular approach, Williams-Wild incision, and endoral approach, you have Lampert incision, Lampert, L-E-M-P-E-R-T. So Lampert has a A and a B. The A incision is the first incision in this approach is made along the entire posterior half of ear canal at the bony cartilaginous junction. And then the vertical incision is made in the incisura and connects the previous incision and the area between the tragus and the root of the helix. So here the incision comes out. So from here it comes out like this. So this incisura terminalis is the area which is devoid of cartilage. So you don't want to injure the cartilage, because cartilage are avascular structure, and then once it is injured, there is chance of developing perichondritis. So once perichondritis develops, it is very difficult to treat, because no matter how much IV antibiotic you give, because the cartilage is avascular, the amount of drug concentration required to have a bactericidal effect does not reach in the cartilage. So this is the classical William Wild's incision. You can see it's a curvilinear incision starting from the upper attachment of the pinna, and here you can see this is the upper attachment of pinna and goes right up till the mastoid tip, roughly 0.5 to 1 centimeter behind the post-auricular groove. Although you can see the way the surgeon is holding the knife is not correct. You should cut with the belly of the knife here. So it should be placed more horizontally. And if you cut like this, what happens? it goes into much deeper tissue than you want to. So what happens, sometimes some vessel might be there, it might bleed also. So always cut with the belly. This is the belly of the knife, so you cut with the belly of the knife. This is the you can see the Lambert incision, and this is the 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock incision at the bony cartilaginous junction, little medial to it, and this is the 12 o'clock inch curvilinear incision between the tragus and the crus of helix. So Lambert incision, this endoral incision even can be used for even certain mastoid surgeries also, like the Bondi's operation or a inside out approach. And this endoral works very nice, and surgeons who use it frequently, but we never use this approach as of now for any ear case. Grafting technique, basic to underlay and overlay technique. And the graft placement in underlay technique is medial to the tympanic membrane remnant or annulus and manubrium of the malleus. So the graft goes medial to it like this, the handle is over here, and medial to the even the remnant tympanic membrane, and then when you replace it back, the remnant tympanic membrane falls lateral to the neotympanum or the lateral to the graft. Overlay technique, here what they do is, here they dissect off the squamosal layer from the middle fibrous layer, and then you place the graft. So here the graft is placed lateral to the fibrous annulus, but medial to the manubrium. So manubrium, you should place it medial to the manubrium in both the case. Now, types of tympanoplasty, you know this very well. The classification, Woolstein, very important. You remember the name, and when we invariably ask to everyone, what are the different types of tympanoplasty, and then whose classification it is. So, the type 1 tympanoplasty is almost similarly like myringoplasty. But in myringoplasty, you don't inspect the middle ear, you don't search for any ossicular pathology or to see the condition of the mucosa of the middle ear. Here, what you do is you just in case of myringoplasty, you don't look, you just go and graft it. So, although if you say type 1 tympanoplasty as myringoplasty, for undergraduates it is okay, but for postgraduate it is not. So perforated tympanic membrane with intact mobile ossicular chain, and the procedure includes inspection of middle ear cleft with closure of perforation. Okay, but this inspection of middle ear cleft is not done in myringoplasty. So type 2 tympanoplasty. So type 2 tympanoplasty, here what happens is there is some amount of erosion of the handle of malleus. So the graft is placed either on the remnant malleus or on the incus. Then tympanoplasty 3, it is otherwise known as columella tympanoplasty. This is also a very favorite question of all the examiner. So here the malleus is gone, the incus is also gone. So the graft is placed over the head of the stapes after checking the mobility. So you check the mobility of the stapes, and if it is mobile, then you keep the graft over the head of the stapes. Then type 4 tympanoplasty is called cavum minor tympanoplasty. So here even the superstructure of the stapes is destroyed. So this leaves the oval window with the mobile footplate exposed. Sound protection of round window is given by putting a graft from the eustachian tube to round window. where mobile footplate of stapes is left exposed. So, so sound protection is because if you remember the baffle effect and recall the mechanism of baffle effect, then only you can understand this why the graft footplate is left exposed and the graft is placed from the eustachian tube to the round window. So thereby you protect the round window from direct exposure to the sound and thereby preserving the baffle effect. So type 5 is called fenestration operation. This was again popularized by Lempert. So here what happens is the footplate is fixed. So the fixation of footplate does not necessarily mean autosclerosis all the time. So even in certain conditions like say fixation of head of the malleus also, because the malleus is fixed and the fixed malleus is incorporated in the tympanic membrane. So any sound wave which comes and strikes the tympanic membrane is negated by the fixed malleus. So over a period of time, now what happens? There occurs ankylosis of the infundostapedial joint, like a disuse atrophy. So these in these conditions, when you remove the malleus, no, you can get the either you remove it fully or you can just remove the head of the malleus, because the most likely the fixed part will be the head of the malleus. So you just nip off the head from the in the neck region, and then the mobility comes, and then the ossicular chain starts function. So in fenestration operation, what happens key, this mobility is hampered. So previously, what they used to do is they used to make another window or fenestra in the lateral semicircular canal. So you remember that I have already told you before that you require two functioning windows for adequate hearing. So if one window is damaged, you have to create another window and thereby improving the hearing chances. So type 6 is called sono inversion, and the round window is left exposed here to the direct impact of the sound wave. And the mobile stapes footplate is protected by a small tympanic airspace in continuity with eustachian tube. So here the sound enters through the what you say, the round window rather than the oval window. You can, if you say up till there are 5 types also, it is well and good. So anesthesia, here we prefer general anesthesia for most of the cases, but outside if you go, they prefer local anesthesia and local anesthesia, because they say in local anesthesia the bleeding is less. But I personally don't agree, because in general anesthesia, if you ask the anesthetist to give a hypotensive anesthesia, then the incidence of bleeding is very less. So, whereas in local anesthesia, if you do and the patient becomes light, because you give any anesthetic drugs, no, so it slowly fades away, and then the patient becomes light. So what happens when the patient becomes light, no, he or she can now appreciate the pain, particularly when you come closer to neural structures like say chorda tympani. It's very sensitive, and the patient immediately complains of pain in the ear. So that is very important. And once the pain comes, no, there is a reflex increase in the heart rate and increase in the blood pressure. So that also causes more bleeding. So anyway, you can do under local anesthesia, you can do under general anesthesia. If you're doing under general anesthesia, then you have to make sure the patient is given a hypotensive anesthesia, particularly in this surgery. And in case of local anesthesia, you make sure that the anesthetic agent you are using is not a short acting one, but rather a long acting one. So positioning, the patient is placed close to the edge of the table. The patient should be more closer to the surgeon to prevent the surgeon from hyperextending his, or if you hyperextend the arm, no, the control is less. So in always in ear surgery, particularly the surgeon should be sitting comfortably, and then you should hold to the suction always in your non-dominant hand, and with dominant hand you go on drilling. So this drilling, or even you can do a widening of the external auditory canal, that is called as canalplasty, which not only helps in while keeping the graft, but also by doing a good canalplasty, it also increases the hearing by roughly 5 to 10 decibels. So that is also, there is a proven here. So that is why a good and adequate canalplasty is a must. And the head is turned approximately 120 degrees away from the surgeon and is supported with a folded towel placed between the table and the contralateral cheek. So preparation: one day before surgery, patient admitted to the hospital. Tetanus toxoid injection is given 0.5 ml IM, and injection lignocaine 0.2 ml test dose given intradermal, and observed for any hypersensitivity reaction. So you remember this Xylocaine preparation comes in different form. One is the 2% and the 2% Xylocaine with adrenaline. So you should avoid along with adrenaline, particularly when you are testing the for intradermal skin test. Okay. So next is antibiotic. Prophylactic antibiotics were given prior to surgery because we know our Indian scenario, the amount of cleanliness that is maintained here, and also chance of hospital acquired infection is also there. So always start a prophylactic antibiotic. Preferably, we go for here is always a third generation cephalosporin, that is ceftriaxone, or you can also give cefotaxime. These are the two most commonly. Hemostasis, particularly if the patient is a stroke patient, and he or she must definitely be consuming the aspirin or other NSAIDs. So medication, and those if they are continuing, then we have advised them to stop these medications at least 10 days prior to the surgery, so that the parameters slowly come back to normal. So prepping of the surgical area, usually 2-finger width is the all around the ear. You just shave it off. So shaving, what happens ki once the hair comes now, then there is lot of sebum secretions from the scalp, and this sebum, which is oily, it doesn't allow the plaster to sit properly. So then what happens ki every now and then the plaster comes out, and then the patient also gets fed up. So informed consent. So prior to surgery, patient should be properly informed regarding nature of their disease process and treatment option and the proposed surgical procedure, including expected outcomes and complications. So all patients should be given information regarding everything. You should not hide anything from the patient. So if your surgery is doing good, go ahead and do it. If if you assume that you are not up to the mark, then you can go to different temporal bone dissection course, which is going on throughout the India, attend and then build up your confidence. So these are the different steps, starting with the post infiltration first, and we usually infiltrate with here with 2% lox in 1 in 2 lakh dilution adrenaline, and after infiltrating the whole post or so the graft, temporalis fascia graft, after giving the incision, the William Wild incision, you harvest then slowly you deepen the incision gradually, and then you harvest the graft first. So temporalis fascia graft is harvested. After harvesting the graft is cleaned of any underlying muscle tissue, and make sure the graft is not very thin or thin and uniformly spread out. And once the graft has been cleaned of all the fish, all the fat or muscle tissue, you spread it out nicely on a either on a, we usually use a glass plate, or you can use also a small steel cup also. And then after harvesting the graft, next we go for the incision on the periosteum. The incision on periosteum, either you can use the C-shaped incision or you can use the T-shaped incision. So the incision is given, and then the periosteum is elevated towards the canal, that is the external auditory canal, that is anteriorly placed. So here you will encounter the very important landmark that is called as the spine of Henle. So spine of Henle is a very important landmark. So the spine of Henle, and then you elevate the periosteum over the spine of Henle. So here you have to use little more pressure, because it will be more tightly adherent there if the spine is prominent. And then after elevating the spine of Henle, what you do is you do the horizontal myototomy. So just the horizontal myototomy should be just medial to the spine of Henle. So where the spine of Henle is there, no, just medial to it, you do a horizontal myototomy. So after doing the horizontal myototomy, you ask your assistant to pass a gauge, what you say, a roll through the external auditory canal, and you take it out through the myototomy and pull it anteriorly. So the whole pinna goes anterior. Whole pinna comes like this. And then after the pinna goes anteriorly, you apply the Mollison's mastered retractor. So you apply the Mollison mastered retractor, and then now you bring on the microscope. Now you bring the microscope and adjust the microscope according to your interpupillary distance. The IPD, on the IPD, the interpupillary distance varies from person to person. So that is why a microscope, if one person is using, the second person goes in, he or she has to adjust it according to him or her in IPD. Then after that, what you do a thorough cleaning. Sometimes what happens, if you wax plug will be there, some desquamated epithelium will be there, give a very good thorough wash, just normal saline, rinse it very thoroughly, use your suction. After you have done proper rinsing and suctioning, and then now you focus the perforation part. So if you can see it clearly, you do the freshening of the edges. So you freshen the margins of the perforation. So after because here it is written you elevate the flap, you give the incision. No, incision you should give after you freshen. Why? Because from this incision usually bleeds, and this will go and accumulate, and that will hamper your freshening, a thorough freshening. So then that's why you avoid this. So because you should not allow the field to get bloodier, and then you will struggle to find out and do a good freshening. So that's why freshening you do it, and after you remove a very thin rim of tympanic membrane all around the edges of perforation, and then what you do is you do the freshening or under surface you do. So the what happens, sometimes few squamous epithelial debris goes medial to the perforation. So there, if you use a special type of what you say instrument known as the circular knife, and with that you scrape off the under surface of the tympanic membrane on most or the mucosal surface. So by scraping, what happens now, whatever if some amount of squamous epithelium have migrated will be scraped out. Okay. Now, after a thorough scraping is done, then you give a good wash again, and then you can give your incision at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So you give the canal incision. So after you giving the canal incision, no, then you start elevating the tympanomeatal flap. So you elevate the tympanomeatal flap medially, slowly, and usually we keep a small cotton ball, so that what happens, the pressure is on the cotton ball and not on the tympanomeatal flap. So if you see now, the tympanomeatal flap gets thinner and thinner, means as you go medially. So there is every possibility of damage to the flap either by suction or by any instrument. So that is why the cotton plug helps to prevent inadvertent tearing of the tympanomeatal flap. So once you reach the fibrous annulus, you can very clear cut, you can see the fibrous annulus sitting on the bony annulus. So now you elevate the fibrous annulus. After elevating the fibrous annulus from the sulcus, you will see the mucosal layer. So you give a small nick in the mucosal layer, and then if you elevate still more, then the mucosal layer, unless and until it's very diseased, is very thin, flimsy, like a thin film it will be. You can easily cut through it. But in some condition where there is significant fibrosis of the middle ear, or the middle ear mucosa has very become thickened and hyperplastic. So there you have to use certain amount of force. Otherwise, nowhere it just you give a small nick, it opens up like anything. And then when you elevate the flap to 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, automatically the mucosal layer gets torn off. Okay, and then you are into the middle ear now. Okay, so once you expose the middle ear from the 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, you try to see the ossicles individually under the operating microscope. So malleus is seen very easily, but the incus, the incudostapedial joint and the foot plate are little difficult to see. So you have to remove a little bit of bone from the posterior superior margin, and then you can see the incudostapedial joint. So along with these bony structures, what you do is you just gently press on the handle of malleus to see for the round window reflex. So presence of round window reflex indicates a intact and functioning ossicular chain. Okay, and then if you are happy, then what you do is you pack the middle ear with gel foam. Tell your assistant to take the graft. Meanwhile, it will be dry. Always remember, when you are placing the graft should be dry so that you can manipulate. If it is wet, no, it is very difficult to manipulate the temporalis fascia, and it is not very easy to do it. So that only those surgeons who are experienced or have done enough of the tympanoplasty can adjust. Otherwise, it's always preferred preferable to use a drive. So graft is placed medial to the remnant tympanic membrane and medial to the handle of malleus. So placement of medial to the handle of malleus is done only to create a good middle ear space post-operatively. So middle ear space is very much required where the air might come and then the middle ear mucosa may get healed. And then tucking of the graft anteriorly is done in few cases where you find the rim is very small, then you can tuck it anteriorly. Repositioning of annulus and repositioning of tympanomeatal flap, packing the external auditory canal and closure. So in certain conditions, if the external auditory canal is very narrow, no, so simultaneously you can do a canaloplasty. So a canaloplasty means if you see the canaloplasty is done, it is like an inverted cone. Okay, inverted cone appearance, it should be like this, like an inverted cone. So the diameter at the tympanic membrane and the diameter at the external or the lateral part of external auditory canal is the ratio of 1:2. So the diameter of the external auditory canal at the lateral most part should be twice the diameter of the at the level of the tympanic membrane. And a satisfactory tympanoplasty is that where you can see all the four quadrants without changing the microscope. See, if you change the microscope, anyway you can see all the four quadrants. But if you keep microscope in one favored position, there you can see all the four quadrants. That is a adequate canaloplasty. So then packing and closure. These all we have already discussed. This is the William Wilde incision. You can see very nicely. This is the upper part. This is the master tip area, and these are marked here particularly for those who are freshers or first year PGs. This is a guideline or a guide for them to suturing while suturing, indicating that this end and this end should be almost in line to one another. Okay. Post-operative care, patients are maintained on IV antibiotics, oral antihistaminic and analgesics for 2 days in ward. Mastoid dressing changed after 48 hours and discharged on 3rd day with oral antibiotics. But here we keep everything for 7 days, and on 7th day we remove the pressure bandage if it is intact, and then we remove the suture, and then we discharge the patient by putting him or her on oral antibiotics. Patients are advised to avoid increasing pressure in the middle ear for first 2 weeks, like straining or lifting heavy weights should absolutely be avoided. So they are advised to avoid water entering the ear till external auditory canal and tympanic membrane. So like diving and water sports should be discouraged for at least 3 to 6 months. Now these are the instruments. This is the Mollison retractor, just to show. This is the Farabeuf's periosteal elevator. This is a suction, Lampert mastered suction. And this is a combined suction irrigation cannula. And here you can see this is a McEwen cell seeker and a curette. So the curette is here and the cell seeker is here, you can see. So this is a ball probe, Shia, a micro ear ball probe. And this is a sickle knife, curved pick, Cawthorn curved pick. And this is particularly used for what you say, freshening of the edge. Some people use even a sickle knife. So here you can see this is a micro ear sickle knife. These people skeletonization of handle of malleus, to break the medullary adhesions and dislocation of enclosed epithelial joint and during stapedectomy and while drilling mastoid at the attic near ossicles to incise the facial nerve sheath in facial nerve. Facial nerve sheath, particularly if you have a very sharp one, it is good. Otherwise, there is a special instrument by the name of tenotome. The tenotome does it. So this is straight peak, again Cawthorne, Rosen's micro ear round knife, Rosen's knife, and this is a cluster knife, a flag knife. This is the curate, house curate, and these are different alligator forceps, so they are not required for you. This is a Derlacus ossicle holding forceps and Devaker's micro dissecting spring scissors. So this finishes your tympanoplasty. Any doubt you have?
No, sir.
No. No doubt. So if any question is asked in your practical exam regarding tympanoplasty, will you be able to answer?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay. Thank you.